Good evening, wherever you're dialing in. Greetings also to those who watch the podcast a bit later. Delighted to have a couple of guests with us and more joining later. We have Jaya Sacisuta Prabhu, long-serving temple president and long-serving panel member and judge of the CPO. We have KD Lacombe, Gurukul alumni and passionate activist on the matters of child protection. And let me just add Sanaka to the call. Also, perhaps the most famous of advocates for child protection around our society. I'll say a few words of introduction. We are going to focus mostly on due process, how child protection matters should be investigated, how rulings should be implemented and observed, and so on. We're going to look at the workings of CPO investigations, the ongoing blight of leaders interfering so as to secure preferential treatment for one of their friends, and then to look at all of these matters in the context of the GBC's recent announcement to seemingly renege or at least delay on their earlier commitment to hand over Lokanath Swami's case to the CPO. There's a little bit of an echo there. Maybe someone needs to mute in between them speaking. And instead, in defiance of their own policies, set up some kind of somewhat arbitrarily constituted panel to look into the matter. So, Jai, I've given a little bit of an introduction, but perhaps you can tell us about yourself, how you became involved with the CPO, and how does one even get to be a judge or a panel member?
Yeah, so I kind of decided Krishna consciousness was the path for myself in late 80s, and I served as a brahmachari. I ultimately became temple president in Denver, but not a long time, just for a year and a half or so before I realized that was going to destroy my.
That's 10 years of austerity on the heavenly planets. That is right there.
Well, yeah, 10 years 10 years living in a temple, a year and a half as a brahmachari. But then when I a year and a half as temple president, and I went back to school. I got married, and that was when the Turley case was coming down the pike. And I talked to a number of parents, and I kind of thought, okay, well, if I'm going to have a family, I don't want to follow this pattern. I better go back to school and get a real job so I can support a family outside. And that's what I did. And then when I was kind of given allowance to go to school and live in the temple for a little while, because I had done my, I didn't have any money. And when I did move out of the temple, I thought, well, now I'm not going to have any service. So the CPO was looking for judges, and Dirgovinda was a friend. I had known Dirgovinda for 11 years by that point, and so I asked him if he thought it would be something I could do. And I grew up in a household of lawyers. My father was a DA, a prosecutor. My mother worked in civil law, so I'd kind of been in the courtroom, and I watched my dad try murder trials and stuff like that. So I was familiar with it, and I thought that would be some sort of service I could keep connected wherever I ended up in the world. And so I gave it a try. And somehow or other, I kept getting asked to do cases for 17 years, and I don't think I'm going to take another one now. As far as how to become a judge, I don't know. They need so many people.
So you just put your hand up and said, "I'd like to do this," and did they vet you in any way? I mean, sometimes there's controversy about who gets to be a judge.
I don't remember being vetted. At least when I took the training, I don't remember going through any vetting. I don't. At one point in my life, there was something kind of going on I thought might disqualify me, and I shared that with, I think, Tamohar, and he didn't think it was a problem, and so I moved on. That's been a long time ago now.
And you say that you're not sure.
Well, I think maybe you had to have maybe you had to have recommendations from your GBC or something like that. I don't, that was 20 years ago now that I started it, so I don't remember.
Yeah. We might come back to you in a little bit to talk about how an investigation typically runs, what a judge or a panel member does, and why it's even important to have a CPO. But let's get the others involved. So KD, maybe you can say a little bit about how you became so passionately committed to child protection and the cause of children growing up in ISKCON having an easier time of it, and so on. Oh, sorry, you're muted. Let me.
Okay, sorry about that. That was my fault. Thank you for having me. First of all, I am passionate about children and growing up in ISKCON because I was a child growing up in ISKCON. So that's one simple thing. And pretty much since childhood, I've been hearing stories about abuse. So I remember also when the Turley case was coming through, and I wasn't so involved with that, but I did hear a lot of stories, and I was beginning to, I was a young adult. I was living in the Los Angeles temple at the time, or actually it was over a few years, but at a certain point I did move there from Canada, and really just heard a lot of stories. And I also got to be a part of some of the conversations where we sat with the GBC and they empathized and cried with us and, you know, said they were going to do so many things. And the Child Protection Office is one of the major policy efforts. Aside from the actual lawsuit, the Child Protection Office is a reconciliatory action. It is one of the only means of accountability or grievance that is available. And so, you know, after living in Los Angeles, I really went on with my life and had children and whatnot. But in the last few years, I was visiting India quite frequently and had to encounter Danadar almost on a daily basis in the same place where he perpetrated horrible crimes against children. And I watched him lead followers who were obviously more like tourists, yoga tourists, who were being brought there by devotee celebrities. And he was acting as a guru and a tour guide in the very place where he'd battered so many boys that I've known very dearly. So I had a really hard time with that, and started using social media to express myself. And it just happened to coincide when he was trying to apply to be reinstated in ISKCON. But the difference between him and a lot of other people is that his reinstatement means that he wants to be reinstated as a guru. So he never stopped being a guru. He never served his time, etc. So I became much more familiar with his history and his file and some of the ways the GBC operated before and after the CPO. And it just seems to me that the CPO is the absolute only accountability to the absolute power of God worship that is given to gurus. So that's why I'm involved. I think it's important that we protect children because I'm sorry to go on about this, but I know that if Danadar had been in India with rumors of him beating cows every day, we know that the judiciary process wouldn't have even happened. So I'd like to just end with that. And yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Sanaka. You'll need to unmute, but maybe we can have you also describe what got you into child protection in such a full-time and intense fashion.
Well, thank you for having me. I started Gurukul years old in Vrindavan in Italy.
Oh, we're definitely having some real big sound issues there.
Oh, Krsna. You can't hear me?
We can hear you now, but it was just repeating and looping before.
Is this any better?
Definitely better.
Okay, then the headphones are no good. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's try like this. I to Gurukul was old in Vrindavan, and then
Actually, it's still looping really badly.
Yeah. What do we? Oh well. I don't know. I can. We don't know what to do.
I guess just try, and we'll hope that it performs okay.
Krsna. I can hear you really. I can hear loud and clear. Somehow, I'm not coming through. Is it any better? No.
Yeah, it's just got some strange loop. That's all.
I'll try. Okay. I had experiences in growing up in Gurukul. I spent 11 Gurukul together. Growing up in Gurukul, especially in the 80s, it was very. There was a lot of victory. There was a violence that I experienced myself, and only on 2 occasions I had adult step in while I was getting. I was on a regular basis, but twice I was getting beat. I had 2 adults step in, 2 devotees step in and say and tell my teachers or whoever was doing it, you acceptable. You can't. What are you doing? This is a child. You're treating him like you don't even treat dogs like that. And that had a really strong samskar. Had a really strong impact. Seeing that okay, that there is another reality, there is another possibility. It really opened up my perspective on things, and that started to create for me the desire to something where I could something else. Then if forward to 2006 was heavily involved in one specific case, and that's when I became familiar with the workings of the of how the GBC used the Child Protection Office. Tamohar was the director at the time, and so I started out. I wanted to do something about a specific situation. Then halfway through, I realized specific situation was a symptom of the problem. The problem was a much bigger and much more complex, and it really how I was running protection office. Like it was like his mindset, his the whole machine. And halfway through, for me, the priorities all pitched, and actually getting that case addressed became secondary, and to create some accountability in the Child Protection Office more important for me, and that gave me the experience of I was about 30 years old at the time, and I thought a child that came to this Child Protection Office with this direct mindset wouldn't sense. We literally had to get our voices heard. Yeah, and from then on, it's been from time to time cases come up, and I'm serve however I can. I'm
Thank you.
Trying to get in here with Lokanath Maharaj. I do think that a lot of wrong.
You need to go much closer to the speaker. You've become very quiet.
Yeah. No, that's it for now. I'll get back later.
Okay. Thank you.
Sorry for the technical issues here.
Oh, good. We it was actually intelligible, even if it was sort of interesting and so on. All right, let's start a broad conversation. Devil's advocate. Do we really need a CPO? There are people questioning the very validity of this. You know, Prabhupada never had one, that kind of mindset. Why does an organization like ISKCON need an independent CPO? Can't the local leaders simply investigate when there's a matter that comes to light? Open to all to answer that question.
You need some. No, local leaders have too much on their hands. And I mean, the best thing for a local leader would be to turn it over to the local authorities if there was, something sufficient. And we did that here once, and the man spent 10 years in jail for it. And that's with me as a trained someone who's been and been with the Child Protection Office for 6 years or something by then. No, in local, and if it's your friend or somebody you know, you have a natural conflict of interest.
Quite often it is the local leader that might become aware something might get reported. And is there a belief somewhere out there that it's an either or? You either take it to the CPO or you go to law enforcement. Do you have a different understanding, Jaya Sacisuta?
No, you take it. You do both. I mean, in the case we had locally, I took it to both, but the CPO didn't do anything because the court found him guilty, so it was null and void. Yeah.
So how should we understand what the CPO's role is if, in fact, law enforcement are the ones who can actually take that kind of legal action? Again, why exactly? Over to you, KD.
Yeah. So, well, there's a lot of different roles that the CPO plays that law enforcement can't play with a society like ours. Law enforcement has particular limitations because, sorry, I'm reading the caption as well.
I apologize. That was me fancying around.
Okay, so for example, I recently was in a Gaudiya Math temple, and I watched an abuser who had a very serious, long-standing case with Canadian law and child protection. And it was because of that case going to CPO that I was aware of who he was. And I was also able to see that he moved laterally, which we see happens with a lot of abusers. If it's dealt with locally only, then they'll just move laterally. And we've seen that over and over again throughout ISKCON. So there needs to be a way for all of us to be able to protect all of the children. For example, in my children's case, they're children of Krsna, and they move between ISKCON and many Gaudiya communities. And it's relevant to a lot of other young people as well that move around, that ISKCON actually is an example, not only in the Gaudiya community, but in all of the yoga world. If they really want to be an example, then they need to take the bull by the horns and really manage the situation and put the children as high of a priority as they put cows or anything else, because we have no society without children. The very definition of society means children. Otherwise, they can have temples full of sannyasis and brahmacharis. No, that's fine. But if they want to have children and women, then they need to protect women and children. And that means having a child protection office. That means that we don't just allow, the limitations of the criminal justice system in one country when we're an international, or not only just one country, but even just one state, one city, compared to our international society. So those are some of the reasons I think it's really important.
Thank you. Sanaka, do you want to come in on this one?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
CPO does not replace the secular law enforcement. The CPO works alongside. The CPO does what the police and the judge do. Like we have of senior disciples who are violent, violent sexual abusers. They have done jail, and now they're out. Do we want people like that to be gurus? Do we want that to have positions of authority in this country? Those are issues that are of no relevance or concern to the judge or anybody else. So those are internal matters that you need an internal body to address. And the CPO is also one of the big services of the CPO is information, training, prevention, which we need to do internally. The police is not going to come to the temple and give a child training. Yeah, just thoughts.
Thank you. Jaya Sacisuta ji.
Yeah, so some more things. Also, the legal system is great, but at least in the U.S., the standard to get convicted is beyond a reasonable doubt. So if you have an attorney, there was about 10 years ago or so in the U.S., there was this woman in Florida who had killed her daughter, and she just had a really brilliant attorney who got her off the hook because he was able to create doubt. But, interviews with the jurors afterwards, they would say, yeah, we think she was guilty, but we have a slight doubt, so we had to let her go. Or the famous O.J. Simpson case in the 90s. He killed his girlfriend, but he had a good lawyer, got him off the hook, although the jurors said he was done. So in the CPO, it's preponderance of evidence. So if guilt weighs more than innocence, then he's guilty. So 50.005% or whatever, then they're guilty. And we've had cases like that where we had quite a bit of doubt, but the evidence was slightly more on something happened. So then we have to protect the children.
So just along those lines, then, occasionally someone who's either an accused or a sympathizer of an accused may say, well, that means that you've not got due process, that you've got something that's not biased. It's rigged against the accused. What integrity is there in CPO investigative practices, or why should we trust a CPO resolution if it might be different than law enforcement?
Well, we're also not publicly labeling them. We're not putting them in jail. We're not taking away any of their rights. We're just saying that they can't give a class and they can't maybe do a public arti. They can't be a guru, or they can't only for a limited time usually. That should maybe change. Are you guys getting an echo on me now too?
Yeah, I think it's coming through Sanaka. But he's about to speak.
Oh, okay. Yeah, go ahead, Sanaka. I lost my train of thought.
I apologize. I wanted to say that the standard of evidence used by the CPO, which is preponderance of evidence, is the same standard that is used in civil courts. It's not something the CPO came up with because the criminal court can very severe punishments. They need evidence beyond doubt. Whereas the civil courts and the CPO has even less power than a civil. So their standard of evidence required is lower. That's just that's an acceptance process. Over to you, Damodar.
Thanks, Sanaka. Well, I'm just saying, if Jaya Sacisuta. So the angle was, why should we trust the CPO investigation? And just along the same lines, we were talking about this in our prep. Sentencing, it does seem that CPO restrictions are on the lighter side by contrast to the consequences that they might get from law enforcement. Should people take it that seriously, or is CPO a toothless tiger?
I think they should take it seriously, but unfortunately, sometimes it is a little toothless. I mean. Yeah, I think you should take it seriously, and I think temple presidents and GBC should take it seriously and uphold the decisions, and that's where the problem lies.
So that's a frequent issue that you've observed over your 20 years of being involved, the people respecting the CPO's conclusions and so on?
Well, I think that's what everybody sees. I've had my own experience in the most recent case I did, where my local GBC kind of called me and said it was too hard. It was a draconian sentence, his word, life sentence, 10 years to not give a class. I mean, God forbid the girls had to go door to door on the streets of Tampa collecting money at night, totally unsupervised. Among many other abuses and, exposure, voyeurism, or sorry, exposing oneself and all kinds of stuff. I mean,
we've had a very senior leader in the society in the last few days call into doubt the level of fairness in trials. I mean, do you have a response around what systems are in place to ensure CPO investigations follow due process? Are you trained? I mean, is there rigor?
I mean, there's a very basic training. It's like a 3-day training. I've done it twice. I did it in 2001, and I did it again in 2014. I was kind of asked to come. There were a few other people who'd been judges for a while. We came as people with experience. But I mean, you get some training, and those trainings there was one devotee who was a social worker who had experience. The law enforcement agents come. You get some training. Yeah, it's expedited. It's not like you're taking a 6-month course, but these are all people who have, who are, mostly have full-time jobs and families, and they're sudden on top of that. So you're doing the best you can. I mean, and is it fair? I think, as far as how they collect the evidence, I can't really attest to that, because the judge just gets all the evidence. And then we go back and we ask questions. But in many cases, we review what we've been given, which, it's usually the complaint, the response to the complaint, and some back and forth, and then the response to the response, and maybe a few times like that. And we review it. And oftentimes we go back, we have more questions for both parties. This doesn't, on both sides, and maybe have some things that don't add up, and we've gone back and asked. And in one case, it was a case of statutory rape. So the girl gave consent, but she was 14. She was too young to consent to having a sexual relation with a 40-something-year-old man who was well respected in the community. And in that case, we had enough doubt. There was a CPO at the time, had enough funding. They flew me to Alachua to interview both, to work with one of the judges lives in one of the other judges lives in Alachua, and we interviewed both parties. And then it became clear, especially when they gave the same description for the apartment that she had never been in, and they both kind of were able to give a rough diagram of the same thing. Okay, it was clear. It probably happened.
Thank you. Sanaka wants to come in. I'm going to try muting myself and see if that fixes the sound problem.
I just wanted to mention that in the I think Durgovinda started this 98. He was very good. Then we had another 2 directors in between. And now we have Kamlesh Krishna Prabhu. He works as a straight in London, and him and his wife Arvika Mataji, they have masters in child protection. We have most qualified devotees we've ever had running the office right now. They're very qualified. It's not like basically, as a religious, be hard to get more qualified people than what we have right now. They are some of the best we've ever had. I just wanted to that point. I think it's important to make that point.
Thank you. Might bring KD in. We haven't heard from her in a little while. What do you make of the ICC's pushback, the Indian Continental Committee, senior leaders across India saying, we don't recognize the legitimacy of a CPO. It wasn't something that, it's not part of the Bhagavatam. So what do you say to that kind of attitude?
I have no idea, honestly. I mean, I don't think that we're coming from the same page. I just I can understand that some of the boiling point is not all related to the current case on the table. That there are a lot of historic issues on hand. As far as representation in the GBC by Indian people, I think that would be progress. I think that the GBC has probably failed, and probably many Western devotees have failed to properly integrate our Western culture, both in India and in America. So I feel like the conversation, I'm coming in late in the conversation as far as the tension that's coming up from the ICC against the GBC. So it's not all associated with this case. And then it's also getting very polarized with issues of racism and the female Diksha Guru issue. And those issues are, like I said, I'm fine with discussing those topics, but they're different than this. And so I empathize with some of the racial tension, and I empathize with the lack of sensitivity that's been shown historically to our Indian brothers and sisters. I think I've seen it myself. So in that sense, it's unfortunate that it's being labeled like that. I know myself, I got involved in being vocal on this particular case, just the same as I was much more vocal about Damodar. To me, that's much more personal. But in general, I think that what we see is that the general way that the culture in ISKCON has developed is that gurus can abuse with impunity. That's basically the de facto situation. And even in the case with Damodar, you can see that even with CPO guidelines, he is still an unofficial guru because many, many of his disciples have far more prominence than any of his victims. He is much more integrated into the culture of ISKCON along with all of his disciples. So, you know, the ICC and many other people want to ask, what about the disciples? And this is the problem with the culture that we've allowed to go on for so long, because the premise of that very question is wrong. The first question should be, what about the victims? Second question, what about the guru? All of these disciples. Okay, let's talk about the guru. You know, if they are supposed to have, you know, they're touted as an absolute power, worshipable like God, right? Like our living manifestation of God. So, and they're worshipped that way with garlands and ceremony and all of this like pomp and, you know, over the top extravagant worship. And with people like hitting the floor and bowing at their feet constantly. So that's on one hand. And so when there's an offense made, they're given a suspension. So let's just look at that. These are men who are already elevated on thrones, on stature, and they're given every level of privilege and glory in our society. If they're given suspension, it doesn't even bring them equal to regular people. It just means they're not initiating. It puts them like, it's like qualified immunity for police. And they get given desk duty when they kill somebody. So gurus get given desk duty and they just get put back on the street. Nobody's ever been properly punished, including any of them. Any of them who've pretty much ever worn saffron have not been properly punished or held accountable, and they're still elevated as gurus. So whatever the ICC says, I really don't have I don't know how to solve that. What I do know is that it's inappropriate to have suspension. That's not an appropriate response. And it's not even, so all these things about double jeopardy or anything like that, there's no time being served. People say that about Danadar too, that he served his time. Served his time doing what? Being a guru? So let's talk about the guru, not the disciples, is my question. My correction on that.
Thank you. I've got another question for you, Jaya Sacisuta. We've been talking about compliance as a major issue, and even worse, leadership interference. To KD's point, sometimes a very senior person will be the subject of the CPO investigation, and it then appears that friends suddenly start canvassing on that person's behalf, trying to maybe get some preferential treatment during the investigation. And when the investigation is reached, then sometimes there's public displeasure and even ongoing campaign to either reverse it, protest it, or simply non-compliance. It's up to you if you want to talk about any particular examples, but I'd love some comments from you around why do you think that kind of stuff happens, and how does CPO deal with that?
Well, why it happens, that's easy, because they don't want to see their friends punished. You know, they want to stick up for their friends. And I think that's happened in I've done 4 high-profile cases, I think. Krsna Pandit, Gauri, Sri Radhe in Mayapur, and Lakshmani most recently. And as for Krsna Pandit, there was a lot, you know, they were trying to take it off the CPO because he wasn't the temple president at the time it happened, but he was a temple president. He was a well-known person in parts of the U.S. at least. In New York Rath Yatra, he led the kirtan every year, and people came for that because it was great. It was a great kirtan. And, but one GBC member had a friend who was having an affair with him, and it was apparently, and was trying to discredit the whole process and went to great lengths. And and another GBC member acted as his lawyer. And it was a practicing attorney. Probably not too hard to figure out who that is. And that's the one where we interviewed for the statutory rape. And that lawyer, the other judge that was there with me, we were sitting on the floor, and the Krsna Pandit and the GBC attorney was sitting on the couch, and he was writing notes. The attorney was writing notes on his legal pad, and then he'd flip the pages over. And so there was no table, so we could see the back of the pages. And in one case, he wrote, we were asking about asking him to give descriptions of the apartment that this girl supposedly had never been in. So the GBC lawyer writes on his notepad in very big letters, "Go light on details. Say you don't remember."
It seems to beg a belief that a holy man, someone who's committed to the process of Krishna consciousness, would have greater sympathy for someone who's obviously offended than the victim. I just can't compute.
Yeah. And in that case, we actually felt like the Krsna Pandit was about ready to admit something. We felt like he was on the verge, and then that tipped the scale the other way. But since they gave the same description of the apartment, that was clear enough for us. And in the most recent case of Lakshmani, after my son was born in 2017, we took him to New York to meet my wife's family, to introduce him to my wife's family, and then we were thinking about moving to a farm, so we went to visit Gitanagri in New Vrindavan for the 24-hour kirtan in New Vrindavan, and I lived in New Vrindavan for 3 years in kind of the comeback period, or when they're just starting to make the answer to that question is yes, yeah, yeah, and Malati was there, and she was, I'd known her from my time living there, and we had a friendly relationship for the most part. Everything with Malati's kind of sugar and spice. And I'm going to get some harsh feedback from this probably, but that's what it is. But I felt like she was coaxing. She was feeling me out if I would be a good. She was in retrospect. I think I spent a lot of time talking with her, and most of it was nice and it was friendly and it was personal about what's going on in our lives. But after I did the Lakshmi Moni case, or as I was wrapping it up, it kind of clicked. Wait, she was feeling me out to see if I would be sympathetic to her friend. And then because then shortly after that, I got asked to take the case. And then when when we came down with the negative decision at that time, I live in Boulder, Colorado. It's half an hour from Denver, and there'd been and I've been running a preaching program out of my home for about 15, 16 years, something like that. And there was some conflict. There was kind of like an ongoing conflict with the leaders of the Denver temple who should, get to decide this and that and other things. And our local GBC, Badrinaran Maharaj, was being fairly, I think he was doing a fairly good job of trying to keep everybody satisfied and in the middle. And he was trying to broker something that both sides would feel fair. Then he read the decision and he called me to talk about the local issues. But at the end of that phone call, he went over the decision, and I was caught off guard. I wasn't expecting it because that never happened before with a child protection decision that somebody would call me and ask about it. But since he asked, and I kind of obliged and told him a few things, and then the next communication I had with him was the Denver Temple wish list. That I should sign a contract to that. And when I didn't agree to that, then apparently Malati had called the Denver Temple, and she had heard some things maybe that I don't think happened in when I lived in New Vrindavan. I don't know what exactly was said, but they painted this picture about me being somebody who wasn't really fit to be wearing tilak even, and tried to spread that around. And I just wrote, as a response to that, I wrote Buddy saying, fine, don't worry about me. You're not my GBC. I'm not working, and I'm not doing anything that's kind of related anymore. You don't have to worry about me. Goodbye. And yeah, I heard later, I knew that the issue was local, but I heard later from other people that, the things had gotten out to know within other leaders in North America. Watch out for this Jaya Sacisuta.
This, of course, puts the CPO members, whether it's panel members or judges or directors, in a very difficult position because, at least when it comes to ISKCON power structure, they're sometimes finding themselves the target of some very senior people. What does a person do? I mean, you talked about just almost bowing out gracefully or whatever, but I'm thinking now of people who may still be in those kind of director offices who are trying to have the GBC do the right thing.
Well, I had a conversation with Leela Sukha because I still have an interest in the child protection efforts, and I've had a few conversations since then with Leela Sukha, the North American director, and she's presented this idea, which I think is a good idea, that from now on all judges should be kept confidential. In the beginning we just had our names on it, and later on we had actually to sign papers and fax them to each other, or scan them and email them to each other. And I think that idea of it being confidential, maybe there's a list of. Part of it though is that each party gets to see who might be the judges, and they can disqualify people if they think there's a conflict of interest, which I think is a fair and due process. But I think keeping it confident, at least keeping them from being publicly released, is a, you know, would be helpful, and it would get people to being, you know, because I'm sure my story here is not going to inspire people to jump on board and volunteer for that service anymore.
Let's stay with our theme of leader interference. I don't know if Sanaka or KD have any comments they want to make on this subject. Maybe not. Okay. Yeah. You need to unmute yourself, Sanaka. Yeah.
Leader interference, in my experience, has been a problem in high profile cases. So essentially, the problem that we're also seeing here with looking at Maharaj is that operates on a two-tier justice system. When Bhakta Bob does something, this case goes to the CPO, no problem, everything runs smooth, the nobody gets badgered, there's no intimidation, there is no lobby, there is no pressure, none of that. But when it's so and so, oh, he's got then it's a whole different. There is favoritism. There's all these ugly isms that we see. There is interference, and like one of the things that I noticed after the documentary, the mental silence, was that in that documentary, I mentioned several people who have guilty of child abuse, and what I found is that no matter how severe the abuse and the evidence was, almost every one for every person that I mentioned, there was his friends, his disciples that came to me and said, really support child protection. Why did you mentioned you should go after the real abuse? Why did you mention my favorite Swami, my favorite, really, that's what he's saying. So it's not just it's a very deeply ingrained. I mean, in Italy we call that mafia. If you're in with the ball, you can get away with anything, and that's kind of what's happening here. Everybody wants child protection, but nobody wants to pay emotional, mental price for that. But then if we continue with this system where there is favoritism, where there is a two-tier justice system, we're just gonna have more and more problems, because everybody's got a favorite. Everybody likes some, every perpetrator lobby, especially the big ones. I've always been of the view that long-term costs of protecting child abuse are far greater than whatever disruption. For example, in looking at Swami's case, if the case is handed to the CPO as I think it should, it's going to be a big disruption. The long-term costs are going to be far greater if we don't. And to me, that's something that we really need to look at society. JD, would you like to add anything?
I wanted to just say something about the long-term costs that we've already seen, because, I was mentioning before that there's this impunity that high-profile abusers tend to have because of the politics. And there's been, what's happened over time is that the philosophy is being used to rationalize abuse and to minimize abuse and to justify it and to silence it. And that's another level of spiritual abuse. And that's become interwoven into our culture. In our ISKCON culture, so many times. I mean, this is almost a pat answer. Like almost everybody who's suffered has been told it was our karma. We hear things like, not a blade of grass moves without the will of the Lord. And then, of course, the Bhagavad Gita is quoted to call it accidental and things like that. So to me, these are very extreme long-term costs. Okay, there's immediately there's short-term personal costs, and even with this particular case, there's institutional costs. But in the long term, the philosophical diversions that are being made to justify abuse are some of the most damaging, because it also means that all our philosophy is being used to psychologically manipulate people as a habit, kind of on a general. I mean, every single woman's been told that if they think they're a woman, they're less intelligent and stuff like that, right? So this is where you can stack up those verses. ICC, so many people will give more and more quotes. And I say the more and more quotes you give me to justify child abuse, the more and more damage you do to ISKCON. The more and more you tell me that it's the will of God, that there was an epidemic, international, systemic child abuse, and that was the will of God, that's problematic. Who wants a God like that? So that's the long-term damage and the long-term cost. And another thing Sanaka said, sorry, just really quickly, you said everyone wants child protection, but then it's their friends and their friends. And another thing that I've seen happen is that ISKCON, GBC are some of the kind of rhetoric that I even heard from a GBC recently on your podcast, Prabhu, Damodar Prabhu. He was saying, let me just try to gather my thought here. He was saying that it's the responsibility of the parents now. And I think that this distinction of like, oh, people have this all or nothing, like, oh, it should be like GBC or ISKCON should be taking care of my children. And then now ISKCON's like, oh, all the parents should be taking care of their children. And I just want to make this really important point that child protection is everybody's responsibility. If my child is drowning, I hope that somebody will save that child. You don't have to tap me on the shoulder to do it. We all have a responsibility to stand up. We all have a responsibility to be looking for red flags and grooming behaviors and all of the ways that if we're friends with a Swami and we're like, oh, well, that's such a nice Swami, then, we don't want to mess with them. Well, that's not us taking responsibility. And so anyway, I think that's what I wanted to say about everyone. Everybody wants child protection, and everybody should be involved in child protection.
Thank you. Let's move on to the Lokanath Swami case, because obviously it's very, very current. Now, I can read these documents if you like, Sanaka, because I know that your sound is a little problematic, but feel free to jump in if you want to make comment at any point during. So I have, first of all, it resurfaced as a case, even though there's been several attempts to address it over the years, but it's never been to the satisfaction of the community. And a case was made, an open letter was written to the North American GBC in early May, late April, early May. And the North American GBC made this statement, the North American Leadership Council made this statement on May the 8th. Dear North American devotee community, our obeisances, glories to Srila Prabhupada. There's been a great deal of discussion on the internet and social media about Lokanath Swami regarding an incident of sexual abuse of a minor that occurred in the eastern United States in 1990. North American GBC felt that the international GBC body made a good faith effort at the time to investigate and respond to this case of child sexual abuse and place some restrictions and mandates in place over his activities. Later in 1998, when the Child Protection Office was established, the GBC felt that since Lokanath Swamy had gone through a previous investigation, there was no need for the CPO to re-examine his case. In addition, due to the legal concept of double jeopardy, a person is not adjudicated repeatedly for the same offense. I'm going to pause at this point. I will go into the rest of that document. But let's just deal with this idea of double jeopardy, because this idea that someone has already been investigated and therefore you can't keep trying someone for the same crime. Why does that not apply here?
Double jeopardy is okay. I'm not a lawyer. My understanding of double jeopardy, but so I just want to make that. But my double jeopardy is that it's a concept used in a criminal justice. So you have been tried criminally for a crime. You be for the same crime criminally, again in a criminal court. Reconsider now can still go to a civil court. If a case has been tried in a criminal, can take it to civil court. So even if the GBC had done a fantastic job at addressing the Swamy case, one could still argue. Well, I to take it to the CPO. I feel the GBC was not equipped to deal with, and I would like the case to be taken to the CPO. But the matter is, CPO handled the case terribly. They, I mean, the amount, there's pages and pages and pages. The case was mishandled by. So to argue that we mishandled the case 30 years ago, therefore we can't look at it now. There's not a leg to stand on for that argument, which is kind of what people are suggesting. The GBC. If a case was mishandled by the GBC, it is only right that it is done properly. These are my initial thoughts anyway.
I'll see if Jaya Sacisuta and KD have anything to add with this double jeopardy idea. Maybe not.
Well, I just thought Jaya Sacisuta would maybe he has more legal expertise, but the thing that I can see just on a basic level is that the case was never handled by the CPO, and it was handled by a secret panel of GBC who did not handle it. They concealed it and colluded with the perpetrator. So mishandling is like not even a word. It's like they actually compounded the abuse because of how they silenced it and how they intervened with the victim. They took testimony. Even the original intervention was questionable. The interview was questionable, and it was conducted by a disciple of a guru who was on the secret panel that with the intent of concealment. And it's almost visible in the interview itself, that initial interview. So I see that in intervention with the victim as a secondary level of abuse, institutional abuse of the victim because of how she was repeatedly silenced, and the psychological team that was supposed to be evaluating him was debunked, for one. But then the things that I've never seen what that organization released, but what the GBC wrote about that report was some of the most, this is where some of the institutional spiritual abuse happened, because they put in writing words of Srila Prabhupada and words of the Bhagavad Gita to justify it. It's built in, it's baked into this case, and one reason why it's so important is because of the spiritual mishandling that was built into this case by the GBC. So the whole thing needs to be dismantled. It is why it's so destructive. It's like we went to pull up a weed, and the weeds are through the entire garden because of the spiritual mishandling. And now when you go up to pull up a weed, it's pulling up our entire society because of the damage done. So that's my opinion on it not being handled properly the first time.
Jaya Sacisuta Ji, anything to add?
Yeah, and I don't think double jeopardy applies because the CPO didn't handle it. You saw Saraswati post the rules up there. It didn't go to a judge, and it should go through the proper due process. I'll give the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they tried the best they could according to their limited capacity. In '93, maybe. But it didn't go to the CPO, but even that they're concerned about double jeopardy shows that their concern is with the perpetrator, not the victim. They're concerned about the effects on Lokanasamy, not the young girl, the woman who was abused by him. And the justice system is to protect people from abusers. It's to protect people from being, and that's what it's for. That's what this is for. That's what the CPO is here to protect, so that kids don't get abused. It's not to punish. That's not the purpose. It's to punish. And really, not having disciples, not giving Bhagavatam class, not leading kirtan. Those aren't punishments. And the ruling can only affect in the ISKCON institution. When I got started with this, I think it was with one of the cases I had, the perpetrator was threatening lawsuit against us, for an anti-defamation lawsuit. So I asked one or both of my parents, who were attorneys, was that something real? Should I be concerned about that? And they laughed. I said, no judge is going to take that case. They're going to see that this is a religious institution that's making some effort to take it seriously. And that was, in 2002 when the Boston Globe broke the article about the Catholic Church. And come on, no judge is going to take it. And even though that's not fresh, I think that's still valid. No judge is going to take the case because, we're making an effort to protect victims. And now in the U.S., we've got the USA Gymnastics that we're still hearing about 3 years later. And 4 years later, that's still in people's consciousness. And, so I mean, it's about protecting people. It's not, I'm sorry. I'll stop there.
No, it's a good point. And there is a well-known phenomenon called DARVO, which seems to play out: deny, accuse, reverse victim and offender. So the idea that somehow the offender is the one who's now being victimized seems to be a classic strategy to either have a go at whistleblowers, have a go at the ones who are actually legitimate persecutors. I agree with the comments that have been made here. Had the case been originally tried in a court of law, and by the way, why wasn't it? Then it may absolutely be right to say if there were some issues with how that case was then prosecuted, you can't keep subjecting a person to a fair trial over and over and over. But the fact that it avoided that particular pathway, possibly even into contradiction of mandatory reporting, and now to say, we want the cover of law, we want the cover of legal process. I'm sorry, you can't have it always round. All right. While I look up the next part of the decision, Jaya Sacisuta, I think you said that the Spotlight film, or maybe the Spotlight case, the Globe article, was something that had quite a profound effect on you?
Well, yeah, I watched the film. I mean, but when I saw the film, whatever was it, 5 years ago or so, I saw the film, and that effect. I mean, that effect. Well, two things. So it kind of inspired me to take the career path I'm going to try to take and to move into journalism. Because just the powerful effect that these people had for the good of the world. But also,
absolutely.
But also at the time we were working on the Shirade case, and when we worked on the Shirade case, we saw that there were a lot of the same things that happened with Bhakti Vichapurna Maharaj when he was running the Gurukul, minus minus the sexual abuse, much of the psychological abuse, at least, was, and maybe I don't remember physical abuse or not, but some of the things, some of the, I mean, you could read, you read the Sri Radhe case file, and that one, the case, that time I wasn't on the original panel, I was on the review panel, and the review panel was just to make sure that there was, the process was followed properly, but we had to read through the whole case file, and then when we read through, then I read to Bhaktivedanta Purna's the decision on him, not the endless files that I imagine there are, and we saw these parallels, and so then I wrote, and the other judges signed on to it. We wrote a letter to the GBC Executive Committee and to Tamohar and Anuttama, who were the advisors to the GBC advisors to the CPO, and you got to deal with Bhaktivedanta Purna. How can you do this with Spotlight being out? And I think that was one of the inspirations. Maybe we removed that from the letter, but how can we can't have this kind of PR? I mean, how can we do that? I worked for the University of Colorado for almost 20 years, and I would have lost my job if I even got arrested for something like that. You get arrested for a felony or accused of a felony, you can lose your job. It doesn't matter due process or not. And I'm sorry, that's a far more serious consequence than not being able to get Bhagavatam class or have the skills.
Yes, I've heard it compared to a timeout. Someone's getting a timeout. That's literally the extent of the punishment. And then back to being an initiating guru, which, just beggars belief. Let me go on with this North American GBC Leadership Council reading, because there's some very important wording in the next paragraph. So the first paragraph was, we think there was a good faith exercise and maybe double jeopardy counts. So then they go on to say, however, in retrospect, the North American ISKCON Leadership Council, composed of North American GBC members and other leaders, now feel that the case needs re-examination because first, the full GBC was not aware of the extent and details of the actual sexual abuse of the 11-year-old girl. Second, we feel that regardless of double jeopardy, and the next bit we should put in lights, it was a serious procedural error to not have the CPO examine this case. In retrospect, we acknowledge that it would have been best for the case to have been dealt with by the Child Protection Office, which is independent from the GBC and other ISKCON management. Therefore, the North American Leadership Council resolves the following. The NAC requested that the Lokanath Swami case be turned over to the International Child Protection Office, which will work cooperatively with the North American Child Protection Office for a resolution that will be binding within ISKCON. The GBC EC has agreed, and the case has been turned over to the ICPO. While the case undergoes further investigation and decision, Lokanath Swami is restricted from coming to North America, nor initiating any aspiring disciples based in North America, including online initiations. Lokanath Swami has agreed to comply with these conditions. Further, we recommend to the GBC body and the executive committee that Lokanath Swami be suspended from further initiations globally until his case is resolved by the CPO. Finally, we apologize for any lack of vigilance or follow-through with this case, which did occur in North America. There was undoubtedly great trauma, hurt, and confusion to the young girl and her family that should have never been caused by the actions of a trusted spiritual leader. Over the last 30 years, the ISKCON Society and the world in general, and we as individuals, have developed a deeper and more nuanced understanding of the nature of the great harm caused by child abuse. The North American GBC and North American ISKCON Leadership Council members remain committed to the vital cause of child protection and considers the child abuse to be Vaishnav Aparad. We will continue to strive to eradicate child abuse from our ISKCON society. So fairly strongly decisive, this was a mistake that we didn't previously, and it should be done independently, and so on. And 3 days later, it was ratified by the executive committee of the GBC. Much shorter message. Maybe I'll just quickly read that. The following resolutions were passed yesterday in relation to the International CPO's review of Lokanath Swami's case. 1. Lokanath Swami's authorization to initiate is hereby suspended pending the completion of the International CPO's review of Lokanath Swami's CPO case. 2, Lokanath Swami is hereby suspended from his role as GBC minister pending the international CPO's review of his CPO case. And of course, all of this is consistent with GBC resolutions that leaders will be investigated, leaders will be stood down. So in early May, I think, with the exception possibly of some sympathizers of the Swami, the world was generally breathing a sigh of relief. Finally, it looks like something's going to be done about this. And then all of a sudden, it's gone in a new direction. I don't know if anyone wants to comment at this point before I read the subsequent decision, sort of decision, from July. Anyone wish to comment? Sanaka?
I just wanted to say that's probably the strong and most in how do you say, in the content of accountability is one of the strongest letters in the body. It's like what I find disheartening is that when you read a letter like that, I understand. I get from it is, okay, stand. What is the right thing to do? What is the right thing to do? And then it's not that it's not a case of ignorance. It's not aware of what needs to be done, of what is the right thing to do. Just then they just choose not to do it. It's willful. It's intentional. There is the politics that come into play, and we know what the right thing, but we don't want to do it. We changed that now. We are going to do things differently this time, because he is our friend, because he's stakes are too high, so we're not thing. Essentially the second letter says that.
I mean, this would be the only case that we're aware of which has been intentionally withheld despite repeated requests from CPO and to be given to CPO. And no one can think of any justifications why the GBC would breach their own policies in this regard. There's at least no good explanations. Even their follow-up letter in July, which sort of infers that they're now informing us that it's not going to Child Protection Office for the time being, doesn't seem to offer any plausible explanation as to why that change of direction was considered. I'll pause to see if Jaya Sacisuta or KD wish to also comment.
Yeah, I don't really have anything to say, except that it's mind-boggling. They can't just give it to the CPO and let the CPO do what it does. And Kamash Krishna, is my experience with him. He seems like he's a fair person, but he cares about but he cares for the kids.
Of course, in the absence of any explanation, we're bound to, the mind abhors a vacuum, so we're bound to put two and two together. It does appear that there was a huge amount of pressure from the Indian Yatra, and possibly even some significant threats that were made about actions that would be taken if this continued. And it may, certainly no other explanation has been offered. KD, you were about to say something.
No, it's okay.
Let me quickly read then the July announcement from July the 21st. The GBC has been discussing the history and status of the Lokanath Swami issue for many weeks, both in our plenary sessions and among a smaller group of devotees assisting the GBC Executive Committee. As many of you know, this issue has drawn global attention within our society and invoked strong and often contradictory feelings amongst devotees around the world. Among many issues, the GBC is also weighing whether our own past investigations, actions, and decisions regarding this problem were sufficient, appropriate, and what should be improved in the future. Therefore, on July the 14th, which was a whole week before this letter came out, the GBC voted to establish a panel of senior devotees with expertise in both child protection and legal principles to review the matter in its entirety and return a report with recommendations to the GBC. 2 of these 3 panel members are attorneys, and 2 of the 3 are former directors of the ISKCON Child Protection Office. All 3 are respected individuals of the highest integrity. I'll pause here in case anyone wishes to comment just on that initial framing.
Katie, go for it. Go, Katie.
I just wanted to ask, who is advocating for the victim? You know, from the beginning, so the original panel was really advocating for the perpetrator. And even when they sent in a professional, a trained professional to interview the victim, she was still a representation of the GBC. It was all GBC. And this new panel is still the GBC decision. They're still manipulating and meddling in this case, and they're still unable to follow through with appropriate action. So go ahead, Sanaka.
I think that's the important observation, Katie. To go a little stream and look at the legit of the act of panel. I have looked at a lot of CPO cases because for whatever reason I've had a lot of files through over the years. There is no precedent for the G saying, well, we're gonna do a special treat this guy. We're gonna set up a path to decide whether this case needs CPO, which is what now this looking at Maharaj. Not only is there no precedent, but it also there is no, it goes against the GBC's own piece. So according to GBC policies, it's the so that decides whether a case investigated the GBC's business. As the GBC's in the
oh no!
First letter of May that you read for May, I don't know something. The GBC time and again that the CPO is independent, except when Lokanath Swami comes up, or except when Lakshmi Moni comes. High profile cases, and the GBC comes in and says, "Well, guys are not really independent." But that's not going on. We're not going to give you permission. Actually, go ahead with this, and that's a problem because there is no precedent for this. There is no reason. It's indefensible. The existence of this panel is indefensible. The only thing that he can do to case right now is go back. They wrote in first and say, we're handing it to the CPO. They've messed this up enough. We have no semblance of credibility. Transparent. We transparency here and see here. There's no accountability among the GBC. We're too politically influenced, or we're gonna give it to the CPO and let them do it. Now, I think at this point it's also important to bring up Tanya's video wherein he severely undermined the credibility of CPO. Listen to the video. Like the CPO is in collusion with the GBC. Is like, yeah, we're gonna do this and that. The CPO it and that Bhakti Chaitanya Swami not hide exactly what he meant. Personally, like to see a clarification both from Bhakti Chaitanya Swami and from the CPO. What did the CPO mean? Because that reason for concern, and it's a legitimate reason that one can expect from the Child Protection Office, and the violence is not anybody. I think that needs to be addressed. I have full confidence in the qualifications and their relatives that work with the CPO. So the brief parenthesis. So then, having looked, to me, the sense of this panel is indefensible. It's not the GB. There is no defy that. At least they haven't given any reason why they're giving a preferential coconut Swami. Gonna do something like that. The GBC would come up with justification. This is not standard procedure, but we're making an exception for Swami because I don't know why. Haven't done that. They're doing it and expecting everyone to accept that. Yeah, okay. The panel is whether it's not the panel's job. That's the CPO's job. Why is the GBC doing the CPO's job? We already mishandled this case. And then if we look at the actual members of the panel, the Lord forgive me, but we have the two CPO directors in the history of the CPO. And this doesn't mean that they've only done things, but look at all the CPO directors we've had. These are the two worst ones. They both have a checkered. They have, in some cases they handle and well cases they handle them. So we have, these are two of the panel members. The third one is forget his name, Naveen Sham Prabhu. He has zero child protection experience, and then the GBC invite two members from the ICC to participate in the panel. The whole panel is completely biased. They're like Katie said, who is seeking out and what there that this panel with these people, with the history and with their bias, that they will say, well, yeah, I do need to look at this case. Needs to be amended. I say there's zero chance. This is a farce. It's a sham. Anyway, I've spoken enough. Anybody else wants to take?
I'll give you the opportunity, Jaya Sacisuta. I'm feeling for you because it's probably very late at night for you there.
Oh. Yeah, it's 10:30. It's a little late, but yeah, I mean, my feeling is like the right thing is let the CPO take the case, and if the ICC doesn't like it, then call their spade and challenge them to carry through on their threats. And if they do, so be it, because you're going to kick the can down. Sanaka brought up earlier the short-term cost. Maybe you allow one person to control the fate of the institution, and so the short-term constitution is you keep this fake image of one happy institution, because we know it's not. That we know these tensions are there with the women's gurus issues and the disproportionate number of the GBC members that are coming from the Western Europe and America. Telling the Indian temples that are actually having success what to do. I mean, those issues aren't going away. And they're going to get worse. They're going to come. There's going to be another thing that comes up, and so just deal with it. Deal with Lokanath properly. The Indian temples, they're in theory they're free to not follow it. That's their choice. The leaders, they have the free will to decide whether or not to follow that, and we let the CPO make the decision and have it on the books. And at least that much will be dealt with, and that will placate a lot of things. Then if if the whole Indian yatra is not going to follow, then people can choose. Okay, they can boycott the big temples in India or whatever, or they cannot let them come and do fundraising for the TOVP or whatever. But yeah. And I'm sorry, if we actually believe that not a blade of grass moves without Krishna's will, then maybe let's try to do the right thing. And if that's what Krishna, if Krishna wants it to stay together, it'll happen. I don't know. To me that just, it seems obvious. Just let the CPO deal with it. Let people who don't, let people who don't have a stake in the things. The three judges and we're all asked to, when we take a case, do we know these people? Do we have any biases towards these people? And if we do, we identify them, you know, and I've had that where I said, yeah, I know these people, or I've heard of these people, but I don't, this side or the other thing, and both sides get to see our responses, and let the CPO take the case and make a decision, and at least get that done with, yeah.
So I'm mindful that we're approaching the 90-minute mark, and view is that possibly we might move towards winding down. But I'm also very mindful there might have been other things that you'd wish to talk about that I haven't necessarily steered the conversation to. So perhaps we can give the floor to each of you to say some summing up words, or indeed any areas of the conversation that you'd like our viewers to consider. Maybe I'll start with you, KD.
Sure. I wanted to just, especially for the GBC, if they're watching, the first letter that they issued in May, it seemed like they comprehended that harming a child is Vaishnava Aparad. And I hope that they understand that in properly addressing this case, they can help unwind some of the things that they've baked in. Like, if they really want the world to know that they take fighting child abuse seriously, then they have to also address the fact that if they don't put this towards the CPO, they are they're reinforcing the de facto policy of qualified immunity for gurus and sannyasis to abuse children. And I don't think that that's the legacy that we want to leave with Srila Prabhupada's movement. And one really, I know it's timing, but I just want to make this point, and I made it the last time I was here. This is not a fall down. It's not the same as some kind of sexual slip, okay? This has an impact on a living entity throughout their life. So when a child is harmed, it creates this long-term impact that we can see with this very case, that it doesn't go away, it can't be pushed under the carpet, and they need to understand that now, because you thought they would have understood that by the 90s when this happened, but they didn't understand. So they need to understand now that this is not, when we talk about the 4 regulative principles, this is not breaking the brahmacharya, okay? Everybody thinks that's the worst one. This is breaking ahimsa, okay? This is violence. And so when we think about these swamis, think about if they were doing that to a cow. Trust me, if any single person say, like, you're beating a cow every day, you're exploring their private parts for fun, that person we know in India would be killed. So let's just remember how valuable and worshipable our children are, because we worship cows because Krishna loves cows and Krishna is a child. So we need to really learn our religion here. So that's how we're going to end.
Thanks, KD. Lucid as always. Sanaka, anything to say in terms of final words?
I often thought the ISKCON as a society handles the what they view as a big problem. So ISKCON has a very clear, effective system to address the written. If the new bhaktas know, if a Ritwik comes or somebody comes to the temple and starts giving out pamphlets, they get moved immediately. They're very, very, very. Italy, society, we have a better system to deal with Ritviks than to deal with child. We to do, and we can do it. Somehow the Ritviks are seen as a threat than child abusers. There is some kind of collective madness. These are the only words I can use to describe this massive discrepancy. It's not that we don't know what to do. It's just somehow childs are not seen as that much of a big deal. Whereas a Ritvik, oh my God, these guys are a huge threat. And so I think to think about in that. I'll leave it with that. For this opportunity, and the
thanks, Sanaka. Great to have you involved today. And Jaya Sacisuta, our guest of honor.
Yeah, Sanaka got my point. My one point I was going to make there. I mean, I could add on. Gaudiya Math sannyasis are considered far more of a threat than a child abuser, and that's bizarre. Or devotees have been kicked out for disagreeing with the GBC, but not someone who's a child abuser. But I also say, like, I kind of made helping with the CPO kind of. I gave the downside of it, but it's a rewarding service also to feel that you're actually doing something good, and it's protecting Prabhupada's legacy, and there's some value in that, and you feel it's rewarding. It can be it's not so fun to read through the papers, but it's rewarding when you participate, and I also think that the public in general is not aware of really doesn't understand the implications of child abuse so much. I didn't understand the long-term implications until I got involved, and so many aspects of it, or the grooming and all that kind of stuff. People don't understand. It behooves anybody who's a parent. It behooves you to take some sort of child abuse prevention course. Pay some money for it, whether it's offered by ISKCON or if it's offered by some secular authority. It behooves you because you're going to learn a lot. You're going to be having a lot to talk about with the other parent, for some time, because it's a serious issue, and it ruins people's lives. And we want our children to become devotees, not to become atheists and that's what happens often when they get abused.
A massive thank you both for your participation in child protection generally, and also your participation in this conversation today. I hope people have found it useful. We will, of course, upload it, and it might be nice to see what happens in the comment section and just follow on. Hopefully we can just keep a conversation going that results in a more enlightened way of thinking about and behaving in relation to these things. Please stay on. I'll close down the live broadcast, but I'd like to say some thank yous. Hare Krishna.